ethical smart city framework and toolkit. And as Ralph so I also mentioned, maybe there is a little bit of happiness in this smart city and toolkit. Please.
Okay. Thank you, organizers and guest editors, for the opportunity to share our work. Good day, everyone. My name is Rosanne Sauz. I'm here to start our presentation on the Ethical Smart City Framework and Toolkit, an inclusive application of human-centered design and public engagement in smart city development. So here's our agenda for today, and there will be two other presenters with me. I will go through the introduction and background. Irene will discuss our research, and Maddie will finish off with our conclusion. Next slide, please, Maddie. So myself and my colleagues here with us were part of a much larger group of students from Interdisciplinary Design Strategy program here in Toronto at George Brown College. But this smaller group you see here, next slide please, is the research team that continued on with the ethical smart city research. So we have like Irene and Maddie, which are part of the cohort. Then we have Naz and Nastaran, who are part of our faculty. And so building on the work of our cohort, we focused our research on three things. So first is testing our framework and toolkit. Next is to use the data collected to develop an online public engagement tool. Next slide. And last is to evaluate the data collected using Nielsen's usability heuristics. So as this research is a result of an earlier project, I'll just give a short summary of what the Ethical Smart City project is about. So our cohort started this project doing research on smart cities, both through secondary and primary research, in order to understand the different elements that make up smart cities and what is needed to create an ethical smart city. And recognizing the importance of community and city building, we went through several iterations of a framework and tested our theories through design workshops and an interactive exhibit. So we did all of this over a 9-month project, where at the end we came up with our framework, our toolkit, website, and playbook to guide municipalities in creating ethical smart city solutions. We use this diagram to explain what we mean by ethics in a smart city. So for us, the role of ethics in a smart city is twofold. Solutions in an ethical smart city puts the needs and values of the community at its center. But it shouldn't just stop at developing solutions. We need to assess the impact of these solutions on our society, environment, and economy. So as we generate solutions, which are the blue circles, we also have to evaluate them, which is the orange circle. Also through our research, we learned that past smart city frameworks were heavily focused on technology and were tech-driven. And although recent frameworks and approaches are now becoming more human-centered, we developed a framework of our own to help municipalities practice human-centered design at every step of smart city building. We set out to standardize a way for communities to define and develop their own smart city projects, and being true to our definition, each step generates certain outputs that are then evaluated against certain criteria or context. This ensures municipalities are aware of the needs and values of the community and align solutions to that. So accompanying the framework, we created also a toolkit where for each step of the framework to guide municipalities through the process, with the objectives to equip municipalities, next slide please, Maddie, with a community-driven framework and toolkit, provide tools for smart cities to engage their communities, and test the toolkit's usability.
Sorry, now diving into this research, we began by asking ourselves these questions. How can the toolkit support public engagement for ethical smart city building? How does one conduct a workshop that aligns to the definition of an ethical smart city? And last, how can the ethical smart city concepts, ESC concepts, be understood by people who know very little about it? And so in order to test the framework and toolkit, we conducted 4 2-hour workshops as part of the Future Cities Canada Unexpected Solutions Conference, and we hosted a total of 25 participants. The majority of participants tuned in from across Canada, with at least 2 participating from international cities such as Barcelona and Hong Kong. Of those who shared their professional background, 4 participants were in academia, 6 in design and technology, and 10 worked in city building, with the majority in the public sector. Methodology to explore the toolkit focused on how workshops were planned, executed, and reviewed, next slide, to improve the experiences of both user groups, facilitators, as well as participants. This was an iterative process where the previous workshop informed changes for the next. Next slide. Feedback and observations were collected at the end of each workshop, and this feedback helped inform the changes that were made either in facilitation or in the tool. Shown here are examples of qualitative data collected from 3 perspectives: participant, facilitator, and observer. Next slide. This diagram depicts the structure that we kept throughout the execution of each workshop. So when we reflected to see where improvements could be made, we could pinpoint where in the process that changes were needed for subsequent workshops. The next slide. The Nielsen's usability heuristic came in handy during our data analysis. So these are a set of 10 general principles that can be applied in interaction design when refining usability of an interface, and in this case, the toolkit. So to refine the ethical smart city building process, they were used to assess gaps and pinpoint barriers and enablers in the toolkit's design. As well, we used the heuristic to evaluate the user experience and facilitation of the workshops. So there were a total of 73 changes. 26 of those were for the workshop facilitation, and 47 changes were for the toolkit's design. Next slide. All of these were evaluated and categorized under each of the 10 heuristics. And we had the most changes with number 6, recognition rather than recall, where an example of a workshop facilitation change included creating a support system for facilitators that enabled clarity of roles and ease of decision-making. So we added a facilitator script in workshop 2, which simplified facilitation as attention could be focused on making on-the-fly decisions rather than thinking of the next step. A simple decision tree regarding familiarity with ESC concepts was included to help optimize the time spent in the workshop. And a second example, also categorized under this heuristic, resulted in a change in the toolkit, where we added a review step to step 1, reiterating the problem statement and stakeholders developed from tool 2 to tool 3 after the first workshop. As mentioned before, workshops were analyzed from participant, facilitator, and observer's point of view. So by analyzing these 3 points of view, we could assess the overall workshop experience, the relationship between user groups, as well as between user groups and the toolkit.
So all of this analysis led to a major insight. So that is what cities need is a clear, flexible guiding framework for equitable inclusion, open participant engagement, and consensus building so they can efficiently and effectively focus their resources on smart city solution building. So these 3 themes, equitable inclusion, open participant engagement, and consensus building, they became the criteria for creating ethical smart city workshops. What we mean by equitable inclusion is having proper representation of stakeholders as participants, involving diverse and engaged communities at the start of municipal projects to truly uncover their shared values and goals. So that way, cities can begin the co-creation process for solutions to their systemic challenges, and it also addresses barriers to participant inclusion, such as accessibility and digital inclusion. Achieving this discourages bias and ensures all voices are heard. Next, through open participant engagement, facilitators must ensure that there are open communication channels for participants to interact with not only the tool, but facilitators and other participants. And lastly, the act of facilitating opportunities for a group to come to a general agreement for tool outputs constitutes consensus building. So continuously building consensus for each tool in a virtual setting was not an easy feat, as virtual workshops lack that innate opportunity for discourse that in-person settings typically provide. So barriers to achieving this were identified as struggles with voting or low engagement in terms of speaking and having videos on due to level of comfort with the group or the fast-paced nature of the workshops. Enablers to consensus building were subsequently built into workshops, into their structure with the aid of reflection and integration of those usability heuristics Irene spoke about. So where does that lead us? We hope to continue this research by piloting our framework and toolkit with aspiring communities, hoping to launch human-centered smart city projects for more specific real-world testing. So with that, on behalf of the Ethical Smart City Research Team, I would love to thank you for joining us this morning for us here in Toronto, this afternoon for you, and thank you for including us today.
Thank you so much for the presenters, and we are nicely in the schedule, so I would ask one short question and then we have time also for another short question. So my question comes, whether you have offered already the framework or toolkit to your home city municipality?
We did. One of our, when we mentioned earlier that we tested the framework and toolkit through design workshops, we actually invited some Canadian communities and municipalities, researched on their actual challenges, and tried to solve it in those design workshops. And we had an international charrette like 2 years ago to go through that process, which is also part of testing our framework. So it was included in the process, in our design process, but also it just makes sense to kind of like test it through like a real community, but not like with them. But yeah, we can, I don't know if we have time to show examples, but yeah, we were all like, it was a group of like 15, and we chose like 15 Canadian communities, researched on actual problems in those communities and tried to solve it at the end of those workshops.
Thank you so much, and we have time for one more question, please.
If no one is going to ask another question, maybe I can ask a couple just in one. Let's say, I'd like to know if you would like to spend some more words on the concept of ethical smart cities, because as you know, ethics is a convention. And so in some sense, you should define it and define it for a certain given period, let's say, because it may change in the time. So it's important to give, let's say, not a stable, but at least a definition that can be used. And then I would like also to know if you have compared the outcomes of the application of your toolkits during the workshop with other similar work that has been done in the past. For example, let's say in Ireland, or in Denmark, concerning the engagement of citizens.
I can definitely answer the first question. We gave it a lot of thought, actually, in terms of defining what ethics meant. We decided in the end, as you mentioned, it's a very fluid sort of term, fluid word, and it means a lot of different things, not only within time, but with different peoples, depending on their cultural backgrounds and things like that. And so we decided that to keep it quite open-ended, communities should define that for themselves. What does ethics mean to them? Because in the heart of it, we decided that it was the needs of the communities and their challenges that really defines what is ethical for that particular community, rather than having an external definition put upon them.
I can take the second part of your question there, Carlo. So in terms of taking a look at what other cities or other municipalities are doing or other projects, at the very start of our research, we completed over 100 different case studies of different municipalities and how are they conducting their smart city initiatives, whether or not they had defined them as smart city initiatives from the beginning. Some of them had different definitions from the start. but all the way, you know, Barcelona to different parts of the Netherlands to Canadian smart cities, as well as some what we like to call failed smart city attempts, or ones that just did not go as planned, to really get to the heart of an understanding of where our starting point was, then to build off of what Eirene was saying, then to look at what smart cities are doing all across the world, and then how do we inject that ethics part into it after that.